And now, Unit 2, Lesson 7. Analyze the structure of arguments. So different kind of forms, different types of how to put an argument together, what to look for. You're going right along with some of the other lessons that we've been looking at as far as evaluating evidence and understanding argument and things like this. So today, by the time we finish this lesson, we will be able to identify the structure of an argument and determine how structure contributes to an author's argument. So there's different ways you can structure one and different reasons why you may want to do that. Let's take a look here how that all fits together. And here is our audio.
Structure refers to the way authors arrange and present or build ideas in a text. Authors choose structures to present their ideas in the most effective way possible. As you read, consider how the overall structure of a passage and the structure of each paragraph contribute to the author's argument.
So the first way, when we're thinking about structure in writing and formatting, right? We just the simplest idea is an introduction, and then the body of the writing, the article, and then the conclusion. And in this case, we're talking specifically about things like argument. How do you structure that as well? And we'll see here, give you some examples, and it'll make a lot more sense. So our table here talking about how to structure an argument. So we have 4 different main types that we're going to be discussing here, within the description of each. So what it's saying here in text, well, let's start with the different types. So it's talking about a traditional sandwich structure. And that's where the author begins with an introduction that usually ends in a claim. The author then provides reasons and evidence to support the claim. The author ends with a conclusion that could include a call to action. So very traditional, right? That goes along with that idea of how you structure your writing: introduction, body, and conclusion. That introduction is going to include, some type of claim, and then, the body of the writing is going to include the reasons and evidence to support that claim, and then you'll wrap it up with the conclusion to persuade your reader, what have you. In the text box A, it says this author sandwiches evidence between the claim and conclusion. Evidence might include responses to opposing views or support for smaller claims related to the main claim. Right? There's several different ways to go about that within a sandwich structure, that traditional structure. So that's what you see most commonly. You see it. Academic histories use that type of structure. Very, very common to see. So then a pro-con structure is our second one, and it says the author lists the positives. So the pros and the negatives are the cons related to a claim. This structure is effective when the author wants to acknowledge the drawbacks of a position or to suggest that a particular solution might not work in every situation for everyone. So, that's, if you have a particular way to argue, you may have more pros for that situation, but you also want to make sure that you show that there's, some negatives as well. So it's all dependent on the purpose you're writing and the argument you want to take. And that says an author might use a pro-con structure to discuss buying a certain computer. There might be pros such as more memory and cons such as high price. In the conclusion, the author might make a recommendation. So yeah, product reviews. That's where you might see this type of argument quite a bit. Overall, they might, tell you, you should buy, like, here, a computer or a car or something. But they might, show you where, there are some drawbacks to this particular item. So that's where you probably see those a lot, or like in certain types of product reviews. A refutation proof structure. So refutation proof. The author begins by referring to an opposing viewpoint or claim and stating that the claim is false or inaccurate. The author then provides evidence and reasons supporting his or her viewpoint. This structure is especially effective when an author's claim is that another claim is inaccurate. So that is a response to something. Somebody else has put forth an argument and this refutes their claim. And that's going to include a different presentation of evidence. It might even use the same evidence, but taking it from a different point of view to show where, that person, the other author's reasoning is wrong. In military history, I imagine this has happened in other history. I have actually encountered books that were so controversial that there were other books that were just essays about that book refuting that historian. There was two, actually, I recall most recently. One was on the Vietnam War and another one was on the Army, but it was actually the other historians were just so angry about that book that they put together a collection of essays. It's like, they're wrong here, they're wrong about this, wrong about that. And then they actually gave the author an opportunity also to respond. So within that collection of essays, there's also a response from the author. But that is refuting somebody else. And it's oftentimes because of a controversial subject or something in the news, but that is refutation, refuting somebody else's point of view. And then order of importance. So the author states a claim and then lists evidence in order of effectiveness. The author might start with the strongest evidence and move to the weakest, or vice versa. This structure is most effective when evidence or reasons are not equally convincing. So that kind of structure, they use that in intelligence briefings. Like you start with the most important point. If you're briefing the president, they do this where, something happens. This is a guy who doesn't have a lot of time to sit around and read. So you hit him with the most important points, and then in that order of importance. Typically, you're going to see the stronger points, starting with the stronger points down to the weakest, rather than starting with the weakest and moving to the strongest. That's you may even use that in sort of that sandwich structure when you actually start into your evidence. You might show your strongest evidence first and then fill those in with details. But it just depends on your audience, what you're writing about, what the subject is. So, if you're making a PSA announcement about don't do drugs, you would start with, don't do drugs because they might kill you. They're expensive, whatever it might be, but it might affect your family, but you start with the strongest and you lead down to the less important points. So that is the lesson there. Let's go into the quiz. All right, we have our table again, and then test taking text. So before you click to submit an answer, reread the question and all 4 answer choices. Doing so will help you catch important information you might have missed. So I always mention this. It's not a bad idea to intuitively think about the question. So you read it, you read the answers, and you can go ahead and click on, whatever it may be, but go ahead and reread the question and then double check your answer. It's the best thing to do. Make sure that you understand the question fully and make sure you understand all the answers fully. Grace, would you like to read question 1 for us? Grace?
Did you say Grace?
Yeah, you want to read question 1 for us?
Okay. Question 1. If a scientist wanted to argue that another scientist's conclusion were inaccurate, which structure will best support his or her ideas? A, traditional sandwich structure. B, pro-con structure. Refutation, proof structure, C. And D, order of importance. Is it B?
It's C. Yeah, refutation, proof structure. I was just like randomly clicking. I wasn't paying attention and actually clicked the right answer when I did that. So yeah, so if you're arguing against another person's point of view, right, you're going to refute that claim. So that's what you'd most likely use there as a refutation structure style argument. All right, so number 2. Let's see here for number 2. I'll go ahead and read this little passage here. So antibiotic resistance. That's from the mayoclinic.com article, Antibiotics. Misuse puts you and others at risk. Antibiotic resistance occurs when antibiotics no longer work against disease-causing bacteria. These infections are difficult to treat and can mean longer-lasting illnesses, more doctor visits, or extended hospital stays, and the need for more expensive and toxic medications. Some resistant infections can even cause death. Although experts are working to develop new antibiotics and other treatments to keep pace with antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria, infectious organisms can adapt quickly. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria will continue to be a global health concern, and using antibiotics wisely is important for preventing their spread. So, what does paragraph 1 provide to help readers understand paragraph 2 and the claim with it? It provides a blank of antibiotic resistance and explains why it is dangerous. What do we need there?
Cause?
So it's a definition, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So thinking about sort of the context there, so it provides a blank of antibiotic resistance. So it provides a definition of antibiotic resistance and explains why it's dangerous. So, right, it lines out, what is that? What does that mean? And then for 2, what it wraps up with there is, using antibiotics wisely is important for preventing their spread. When I was a child in the early 80s, for some reason, even though I think a lot of doctors knew better, they threw antibiotics at every illness. And to this day, my mother, who should know better as well, if I get like a cold, or my sister or my brother-in-law, somebody gets a cold, she's like, well, you need to go get some antibiotics. Like, Mom, it's a virus, not a bacteria. Antibiotics don't do anything. But that's, we overuse those antibiotics, and while they're good medications, what's happened is long-term bacteria has evolved, and those antibiotics are no longer as useful because they were overused and overprescribed. All right. So 2 is definition, DFINITION. 3, how about, we got the same, yeah, that is the same. No, wait, that is a new passage. Okay, so how about Tracy? You want to read passage for number 3?
Yes. Problems with antibiotics. If antibiotics are used too often for things they can't treat, like colds, flus, or other viral infections, not only are they of no benefit, they become less effective against the bacteria they intended to treat. Not taking antibiotics exactly as
prescribed
prescribed also leads to problems. For example, if you take an antibiotics for only a few days instead of the full course, the antibiotic may wipe out some, but not all, of the bacteria. The surviving bacteria become more resistant and can be spread to other people. When bacteria become resistant to first-line treatments, the risk of complications and death is increased. When you misuse antibiotics, you have a resistant microorganisms that can cause new and hard to treat infections. That's why the decisions you make about using antibiotics, unlike almost any other medicine you take, have far-reaching consequences. Be responsible in how you use antibiotics to protect your health and that of your family, neighbors, and community. From the majorlined.com article, antibiotics misuse put you and others at risk. Question: which claim do paragraph 1 and 2 best support? A. Antibiotic resistant bacteria are a threat. B. Antibiotics must be used wisely. C. Antibiotics may cause serious complications. D. Antibiotics provide only partial cures. C or D? C?
B. So the
D.
claims they're making is, they're very effective, but you need to make sure that you're using for the right thing and that you use them completely. So like I mentioned, they used to give these for colds and just, viral infections, and they don't do anything. But they also make them less effective if you then get a bacterial infection that they're used for. And then the other thing that you never, ever, ever want to do is stop taking a course of antibiotics if you're prescribed them. So if your little ones ever get a bacterial infection, whatever it may be, like pneumonia or something like that, always make sure you take all of your antibiotics. A lot of people you start feeling better, and you're like, oh, I don't need these anymore, but you still have that bacteria in your system, and it can come back with a vengeance if you don't complete your medication, and then you can also get others sick, and it strengthens, then that bacteria becomes antibiotic resistant. So that's what it's saying there. Make sure that you use them wisely. If you're prescribed them, take them all. Only use them for bacterial infections. B as in boy. And then 4, same passage. Sasha Gay, how about reading number 4?
The structure of this passage helps the author build an argument based on the assumption that A. Doctors require more funding to research antibiotic resistant bacteria. B. Infections are the greatest health crisis in the world currently faces. C. Organisms that adapt quickly are generally very dangerous. And D. Misuse of antibiotic medications is a significant problem. D?
Yeah, D as in dog, right? Misuse of antibiotic medication is a significant problem. All right. So that's all we have for the quiz. Flying through this one today. 1 was C as in cat. 2, we had definition in our blank. 3 was B as in boy. 4 was D as in dog. All right. And on to the workbook. And it says structure refers to the organization or arrangement of ideas in the text. So it applies to the entire text. It applies to how you format your argument. In persuasive writing, authors may use a specific structure that best supports their claims. In a traditional sandwich structure, an author introduces the claim, presents evidence to support the claim, and ends with a conclusion, something we see a lot. In a pro-con structure, an author explains the positives and negatives related to a claim or an idea. In a refutation proof structure, an author presents information that shows why another claim is inaccurate or false. And then in an order of importance structure, an author lists evidence in order of effectiveness, either from weakest to strongest or from strongest to weakest. Usually you're going to see that strongest to weakest. But again, people may want to build their case, so they end with that strongest claim that you're going to make. And so now, a new passage here. Let's see what we have. Paying students to learn. Wouldn't that be nice? So American students are falling behind their counterparts in other developed countries. Among the many strategies for improving student performance, few have yielded such promising, if mixed, results as paying students to learn. Students are paid for behaviors in their control, such as reading or attendance, seem to do better on standardized tests. Harvard economist Roland Fryer Jr. found that second graders who were paid for each book they read performed better on reading tests at the end of the year. The gains also carried over to the following year when students were not getting paid. There are drawbacks, however, to paying students. When the rewards are for results such as grades rather than behaviors, test scores do not improve. Critics also argue that payment systems teach students to value education for only short-term gains. In sum, evidence suggests that when applied in the right way, programs that pay students to learn do bring results. So it mentions here in our first text, or underlined here, whatever the structure of a passage, the author must include valid evidence. So it doesn't matter, right? Whether it's pro-con, whether it's sandwich, whether it's refutation or list, it still comes down to credible evidence. So here, and the author mentions a Harvard economist, so that's a reliable source, right? That's an appeal to ethics that we've talked about, is considered an expert in the field. So using him, quoting them, or citing their research is valid evidence. And then finally, I always talk about, words to look for, signal words. So the phrase "in sum" indicates that the author is stating a conclusion or summarizing the points in an argument. So if you see something like that, "in sum," right, your brain should say, okay, we're wrapping it up here. We have a conclusion. They may say "in conclusion." Therefore, that's another one. It's like, okay, we're going to have a point be made here. So always look for those little signal words to help you, sort of with, a new element that's going to appear in the work. Okay, so starting up our workbook, and we're starting with paying students to learn. And it says right here again, so transitional language, that's what we're talking about, those types of signal words. They signal a relationship between ideas. So otherwise, right, indicates an alternative. Consequently indicates a result. So they might, say something like that, or furthermore indicates additional information. Furthermore, moreover, you might see that for additional information. Consequently, result. Otherwise, and then, other transitions for contrast, which I think might be part of the quiz here. So let's see, Etta, you want to read number 1 for us?
Okay, it says the word however in the third paragraph signals a contrast between the benefits and drawbacks of paying students, B, cause and effect relationship between payment and test scores, C, result that contradicts the author's viewpoint about payment, or D, strategy that could be an alternative to paying students? Is it the C?
So it's A, right? However, but, nevertheless, that means you're switching to a contrast. My daughter had a birthday this weekend. She's officially a teenager. She's 13. Her favorite activities are frowning and disliking most things and people. But, however, nevertheless, she's an exceptional student. She's a good athlete, and she has a really sharp sense of right, wrong. So right there, that's a contrast. When you're, comparing, or I'm sorry, when you're contrasting items, you'll throw that in. I like cold weather, but if it gets below freezing or if it gets below 0, it's too cold for me, right? That's a contrast there. That shows a little interruption in thought and you're switching gears. So, however, nevertheless, but when you see those words, a contrast is coming. And again, let's see, Christiana, you want to take number 2 for us, paying students to learn.
Number 2. Why is pro or con an effective structure of this argument? A, the conclusion include a strong call to action. B, particularly strong evidence appears at the beginning. C, the claim is a response to those opposed to paying students. D, there are positive and negative to paying students. Is it D?
So yeah, D. D is in dog for number 2. And you can actually pick up in the conclusion there when it says, in sum, evidence suggests that when applied in the right way, programs that pay students to learn do bring results. But it does sort of imply that, okay, maybe there's a right way and a wrong way. And that's what that article points out. It's like, okay, yeah, there are showing some benefits if they're incentivized for their behavior, not for grades. So there's one upside. The downside is, though, there's this sort of expectation, and it says, if it's not for the right behavior, there's drawbacks when rewards are for results such as grades rather than behaviors. And critics also argue that payment systems are a short-term gain, right? So there's some drawbacks, pro-con argument. Number 3, we have the death penalty re-examined. So Grace, would you mind reading 1 through 4?
Okay. Ever since California added the death penalty to 8 penal code in the 1870s, supporters have argued that the threat of executions will make potential murderers think twice before committing heinous crimes. The bill made that argument numerous times in its early years, and many politicians and prosecutors have offered it since. But does the evidence show that capital punishment deters murders, even when applied frequently and expeditiously? Research suggests it does not. One obvious way to look at the problem is to compare the murder rates in states with executions and those without. For example, compare the homicide rates in California, New York, and Texas, as the National Research Council has done. From 1974 to 2009, the homicide rates in those 3 states track virtually identically, going up at the same time in the late 1970s and the late 1980s, and all declining dramatically since then.
Right. Tracy, you want to read the rest for us, 5 through 9?
Yes. 5. Yet during that time, Texas had 447 executions and New York had none. California had 13. Clearly, something other than executions had an effect on declining murder rates. And that clearly is what we should focus on. That pattern holds up in comparison of Canada and the United States too. Murder rates in Canada have gone up and down in virtual lockstep with US rates over the years. Yet Canada has had no execution since 1962. In fact, during the period just after the United States reinstated the death penalty in 1976, murder rates remained high in the United States while declining in Canada. Murder rates in the United States began a real decline in the 1990s, and research suggests multiple factors are involved. For example, crime experts attribute the steep decline in violent crime that began in 1993 to new police strategies such as targeted police patrols of gun crime hotspots and effective enforcement of gun laws. The warning of the crack epidemic and the decline of the percentage of 19 to 24 years old in the population also played a role. The question, how does paragraph 4 relate to the author's purpose and structure of the editorial? A. It suggests that event repeated organization can be incorrect about some issues, thus contradicting the information represented. B. It indicates that the National Research Council conducts a wide range of studies, thus explaining the purpose of the organization. C. It shows readers that the evidence is from the reliable source, thus validating the sample. D. It emphasizes that more research has been done by government organizations. The hormonal race. So that is C.
Yeah, C as in cat. It shows readers that the evidence is from a reliable source, right? When you cite where that information comes from, so from the National Research Council. That's the idea. You always want to make sure that you're using credible evidence. Some thing that can be verified. So 3 is C. 4, Sasha Gay, could you read question 4? And I'm just rolling past it there. So 4.
It says, how does the example of murder rates in Canada relate to the preceding example? A, it helps explain how the United States differ from other countries in the use of the death penalty. B, it shows that the death penalty is unnecessary in Canada because murder rates are low. C, it clarifies the author's claim about the effectiveness of the death penalty. And D, it provides further evidence that murder rates are not related to the use of the death penalty. Is it D or C?
It is D. Yeah, D for number 4. And when it says lockstep, it mentions Canada's murder rates are in lockstep with the United States. It's a reference to marching. If you're marching in lockstep, that means you're in complete sync with each other. And in this case, it's showing that, when murder rates go up in the United States, they tend to do the same in Canada. And that's probably because, our economies are sort of connected and the same, sort of situations happen in both countries. So that, means that, well, okay, this, capital punishment, the death penalty probably does not affect the amount of murder because the same things are happening in Canada, who's sort of like the US's little brother as far as our economic situations, the way people live and things like that. So 4 is D, and 5 we have the same passage. Etta, would you like to read number 5?
Okay. Let's get to it. How does paragraph 9 relate to the evidence presented earlier in the passage? A, it adds further evidence that the murder rate goes up and down regardless of the death penalty. B, it provides an alternative explanation for why the murder rate has declined. C, it introduces a personal story to show readers the impact of the death penalty. Or D, it identifies the crime experts who provided the author with data. Is it A?
It's B. B is a boy there. So it provides an alternative explanation. So, one thing, and this makes it really thorough. So refuting, the fact that the death penalty decreases crime or decreases, murder. They're adding here other reasons we may have seen a drop in the murder rate. So, in violent crime. So, more police patrols in sort of the in violent areas, gun crime hotspots, and effective enforcement of gun laws, waning of the crack epidemic. So that was linked to a lot of violent crime. So the decline in that, just the decline in those, murderous 18 to 24-year-old population. But that violent crime, among younger adults then. So there's other links to it is basically the point there. B for number 5. Same passage for number 6. Christiana, how about reading number 6 for us?
Number 6. Why is a refutation proof structure effective for this passage? A, the purpose of the argument is to show that the death penalty does not deter crime. B, the evidence shows the positive and negative of enforcing the death penalty. C. Some evidence in favor of the death penalty is much stronger than other evidence. D. Readers need background information about the death penalty to understand the claim. Is it A?
Yeah, purpose of the argument, right, is to show that the death penalty does not deter crime. So, and that's an argument that's out there. There's a separate point of view that, the threat of the death penalty prevents people from murdering other people. And in this case, this person is saying, is refuting that claim. So A, and then of course you provide evidence to refute that. Let's see, we have longer passage here. Grace, again, I want to ask you to read for us 1, 2, and 3, if you don't mind.
Okay. Citizenship and the right to vote. In November 1872, Susan B. Anthony voted in a presidential election at her polling place in Rochester, New York. She was arrested, indicted, and put on trial for voting illegally. Before her trial in 1873, she gave this speech presenting the main arguments in her defense. I stand before you tonight under indictment for the alleged crime of having voted at the last presidential election without having a lawful right to vote. I not only committed no crime, but instead simply exercised my citizens' right, guaranteed to me and all United States citizens by the national constitution, beyond the power of any state to deny. The preamble of the federal constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, insecure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this constitution for the United States of America." It was we, the people, not we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people, who formed the union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them the ballots.
Okay. Now I'll go ahead and read the rest here. To women, this government has no just powers derived from consent of the governed. To them, this government is not a democracy. It is not a republic. It is an odious aristocracy, a hateful oligarchy of sex, which makes father, brothers, husbands, sons, the oligarchs over the mothers, or over the mother and sisters, the wife and daughters of every household, which ordains all men sovereign, all women subjects, carries dissension, discord, and rebellion into every home of the nation. Webster, Worcester, and Bouvier, those are all dictionaries, all define a citizen to be a person in the United States entitled to vote and hold office. The only question left to be settled now is, are women persons? And I hardly believe any of our opponents will have the hardihood to say they are not. Being persons, then, women are citizens, and no state has a right to make any law or to enforce any old law that shall abridge their privileges. Hence, every discrimination against women in the Constitution and laws of the several states is today null and void, precisely as is everyone against Negroes. All right, so Women's Right to Vote by Susan B. Anthony, 1873. How about Tracy? Would you like to read number 7 for us?
Yes, number 7. Which statement best right The structure of the passage. A. It presents evidence in the refutation proof structures to respond to the idea that women do not have the right to vote. B. It uses a pro-con structure to explain the positive and negative of voting rights for women. C. It uses a traditional sandwich structure to present evidence supporting the claim that women have the right to vote. D. It engages the readers by beginning with the strongest evidence showing that women have the right to vote. A.
Yep, that's another refutation, right? Refuting the claim, the idea that women should not receive the right to vote. All right, so A for number 7. 8. Same passage. Sasha Gay, would you like to read number 8?
How does a quoted excerpt from the preamble of the U.S. Constitution help support Anthony's argument? A. It suggests that the right in the U.S. Constitution belonged only to women. B. It explains the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. C. It explains why states cannot make laws about the right to vote in federal elections. And B. It helps establish that a citizen's rights flow from all of the people and are shared by all of them. Is it D?
Yeah, D, right? It helps establish that citizens' rights flow from all the people and are shared by all of them. Kind of harkens back to what we're talking about John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, the idea of natural rights, right? Kind of bringing that up again. And let's see, number 9. Etta, how about reading number 9?
Okay. What is the purpose of paragraph 5? A, it explains why women are citizens of the United States. B, it sets up the next paragraph by establishing that a citizen is a person with the right to vote. C, it sets up the next paragraph to contradict the definitions in Webster, Worcester, and Bouvard. D, it established the U.S. Constitution gives women the right to vote and hold office. Hold on. Is it B?
B, yeah, setting up that. So, looking at, the definition of a citizen. What does that mean? So, and she goes, she's referencing 3 different dictionaries and how they define a person. So, and that is strengthening her argument then. So 9 is B as in boy. I'll go ahead and finish it out. We got, I think, just one more. Yeah, one more passage here. I'll go ahead and read here. So the influence of TV ads on underage drinking. Given all the money the alcohol industry invests in advertising, it probably does encourage consumers to drink. But underage drinking is a complex problem with a variety of causes, and anybody who thinks the television ads are enough to get children drinking isn't paying attention to the facts. Let me use myself to illustrate this point. I was fortunate to grow up in a stable 2-parent home. My parents rarely consumed alcohol and never around me or my brothers. I also had few friends who drank, and despite watching those stupid Budweiser ads during every Super Bowl, I didn't touch alcohol until I was in my early 20s. Now, can you guess which 2 factors commonly lead to underage drinking? If that question wasn't rhetorical enough, the National Institutes of Health points out that parents who drink more and who view drinking favorably may have children who drink more, and an adolescent girl with an older or adult boyfriend is more likely to use alcohol. Similarly, hereditary factors undeniably influence underage drinking. The NIH further explains that children of alcoholics, COAs, are between 4 and 10 times more likely than their peers to become alcoholics as well. And the study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that COAs are much more likely to take up drinking at an early age. The most consistent antecedent risk factors for starting to drink in adolescence, the researchers wrote, were parental and peer approval and models for drinking and drug use, as well as adolescents' own prior involvement in delinquent behavior. Parenthetically, there's also that pesky First Amendment to deal with. Any attempt to further regulate alcohol advertising is going to run headfirst into a well-funded and justifiable legal challenge from the alcohol industry. Advertising is protected by the Constitution. It's called commercial free speech, and the Supreme Court has come down in support of it. That's from PolicyMike.com article, Alcohol Advertising Does Not Cause Underage Drinking by Cameron English, 2013. So for number 10, Christiana, would you like to read number 10 for us?
Number 10, which statement best explain the purpose of paragraph 1? A, to alert readers that the passage will present the pros and cons of airing television aid for alcoholic beverages. B, to present background information about underage drinking and television aids to prepare readers for the claim. C, to distinguish the author's viewpoint from others and imply that television aid alone do not lead to underage drinking. D, to share personal story to draw readers into the passage and persuade them to agree with the author's viewpoint. Did you see?
C, yeah, C is in cat. 10 is C. Great. How about reading number 11?
Okay. What does the word similarly indicates about the relationship between paragraph 2 and 3? A, it indicates that paragraph 3 supports a new claim introduced in paragraph 2. B, it indicates that both paragraphs are used the same evidence to support opposing viewpoints. C, it indicates that paragraph 3 acknowledges the negative of the idea in paragraph 2. And D, it indicates that paragraph 3 provides information to add to the personal example in paragraph 2. D?
Yep, 11 is D. It indicates that paragraph 3 provides information to add to the personal example in paragraph 2. So, there's several words you could use there. Similarly, I don't like that word because I have trouble pronouncing it. You could use furthermore, right? Furthermore, hereditary factors undeniably influence underage drinking. Moreover, hereditary factors undeniably influence underage drinking. Additionally, right? Those are similar words that you could put in there to signal that you have additional information to give about that particular subject, or evidence in this case. And then our last question here, 12. How about Tracy? You want to finish here? Number 12.
Yes, which statement best explain how the author has constructed the argument? A, the author states a claim and presents the pros and cons related to it. B, the author used a traditional language structure to introduce a claim and present evidence. C, the author states the claim and present evidence in order of strongest to weakest. D, the author describes personal events in the order in which they happen. C.
C. Yeah, C as in cat. The author states the claims, presents evidence in order of strongest to weakest. It may be a little difficult to see if that's the strongest case to the weakest case until you get to the end, right? So, but by the end, she's also pointing out, it's like, okay, there's also a First Amendment, appeal to this as well, which would be a weaker, point to make. So that kind of indicates that there's a setup of strongest to weakest there. And another thing I want to point out real quick before we finish, she uses an anecdotal piece of evidence, right? She says, let me use myself to illustrate the point. I was fortunate to grow up in a stable 2-parent home. My parents rarely consumed alcohol. If she only used her account, that would be anecdotal. But this is a really, flushed out idea. She ties that into other evidence about other, children in similar households who, aren't exposed to drinking and things like that. So she starts with an anecdote about herself, but then ties that into the rest of the evidence. So it makes a really strong case. So 12 is C. Does anybody need me to follow up there with any answers?
No.
No, everybody good? Okay, let's see. I think I got one in the chat here. Let's see. Number nine, Grace, was B. B as in boy. Type that in there too. Any others? Okay.